Hey, what's up, everybody? JB here from Tell Me You're Joking. It's been a minute. Life, turkey, and
So
of
much turkey.
course, and of course, soccer has gotten in the way of my friend and I, Peter and I, being able to sit down and talk about the things that we love that drive us nuts. And you probably are just like, oh my God, I'm so over it. But you're not, because you're here. So you do want to hear what we have to say, maybe.
I think that's how we
Um,
feel too, really.
yeah, I know. I'm like, oh my
Completely
God.
sick of it, but also have to talk about it.
I feel like at times I just want to talk more and more about it because it's almost like, when you run. Have you ever been like a runner, like a long distance runner
No,
ever, or had a?
no, you clearly don't
It's
know me at all.
well, you run, and at some point it all hurts, and then you push through, and you're like, well, it doesn't hurt as bad, and it's just you're fooling yourself. That's how I feel about today's news landscape.
Hmm.
I feel like I just want to keep. There's a threshold, and I haven't found it yet. So
I mean, mine comes and goes. I'll crash and be like, I can't talk for a week about politics, but
yeah.
then the next week, all I can talk about is politics. So
Well,
you
it's
know,
almost like when it gets really, really easy and you don't feel pain, that might be you actually falling through the air off the cliff and you don't realize.
I feel like I
So,
used to live in that mode. Actually, the falling off the cliff in Jeff City, it was just constantly in the air, looking around,
yeah.
going, "What the hell am I falling into next?"
Well, here we are. It is the date time of this recording is Thursday, December 4th. Quick recap. A couple weeks ago, yes, the government opened back up. Yes, the Republicans are still a supermajority. And yes, it's shaky at best. News across the board, whether it's economics, household finances, global issues, personal issues, legal issues. Not only is there, chaos headlines everywhere, but there's chaos within the Republican Party. So, without further ado, given the long, long list of things we could talk about, I'm actually going to kick it to you first. Peter, you wanted to start off with our former weekend talk show host and the job he's doing over there at the
Mm.
DOD. Drop it on us. Let's hear what you have to say about
Yeah, well, you mentioned
Turkey.
Republican chaos, and I'll almost say finally there's some dissent within the Republican Party, open dissent, and it seems to be mostly around this Hegseth stuff. Pete Hegseth, right, the guy that came out on and gave that first ever speech where he brought all the generals from around the world into one location in order to basically tell them that he knows war and look how macho I am. And I mean, he literally said, we don't want to be, our military shouldn't be bound by stupid rules of engagement.
Yeah.
Well, here we are a few weeks later, seeing very clearly that he meant that. He doesn't think the military needs to follow law, international treaty, or American law for that matter. Uh, they should just kill people because what we do is we kill people. He said that also. And so now we've got it coming out where he's ordering generals in the military to do blatantly illegal killings. Now, mind you, these strikes, we've talked about them a bunch already. The strikes on
Yeah.
boats in the waters there, they're claiming are drug traffickers. Of course, even some of the Republicans are coming out going, well, that's absurd. On these little boats, they wouldn't be able to get to America
Yeah.
trafficking drugs. So they're clearly not. We've got family members of the guys killed saying they were fishermen. Um, so already this thing's on shaky ground, and the lawyers in the department have been fired and pushed out for saying, yeah, you don't have legal authority to strike them without warrants, without evidence at all of crimes, let alone claiming they're an active threat. But now they're going a step further and saying not only are they striking these boats illegally, they're doing something that we all agree is a war crime if we were in war, which we're not, but a war crime of killing the survivors that are in
Yeah.
the waters. Now,
Yeah.
the so-called double tap, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so let's do this for the sake of the conversation though. Let's take out some of the hypotheticals and the what ifs as far as like we don't even know if they were drug dealers.
Right,
For the
right.
sake of our conversation, let's say they are. We
Yeah,
know there are drug dealers, and we know that a lot of them put the cocoa on boats and they hit the water. but what we as a first world power, as the first world power, like part of what made us what we are is our adherence to law and process and duplicity as
Mhm.
far as like the ability to make sure you might be having a bad day, you don't have the right to make this decision, right?
Yeah.
um so I just, where I want to go with this is it, the level at which this administration, through the press secretary, through the president's own words, and individuals like Marco Rubio and others that are in the cabinet, are defending Pete Hegseth and his actions and his demeanor. And where I'm going with this is, it is such a stark contrast to 2016, 17,
Oh yeah.
18. When you look at the cabinet that he had first go, it was, there was enough people in there that kind of like, we can't do that.
Yeah, they
And then,
expected the laws to be a boundary that they had
yeah,
to at least be within to some justifiable degree.
yeah, and then the end result at that time was, um Trump fired them all. I mean, the
Right.
rotation,
Right.
the whole Scaramucci, right,
Oh,
became a
fired them all
thing.
and made them targets for the I mean, he's using the DOJ against those same people that he had in place. And he's trashing their reputation every day, like ever since
So
they left. So it's a bigger threat than just you're going to lose your position. It's you're going to lose your position, and I'm going to throw every flame I have at you.
why do
Uh,
you think why do you think it is, though, this time around? Because I don't think there's ever been a particular cabinet member, other than maybe RFK Jr., in so much that when you look at the things that they have done, the things that they've been involved in, the words that they have come out of their mouths, the breaking of protocol, the breaking of norms, Pete Hegseth is at the top of the list
oh,
in recent memory, right? If we go back to even Reagan's administration, of breaking laws and protocol.
yeah.
Why, in your opinion, why do you think this president is creating an environment in which none of that matters?
Well, it's a few things, and first of all, to your point, like it's not the first time we've seen problems among appointees like this. Like going back to Reagan, but even the Bush years, we saw lots of self-dealing people where they came from an industry, getting appointed to regulate that industry, things like that, like that I
Right.
would call corruption. But it pales in comparison to what's happened here, and I think that's for a couple of reasons. First of all, because he got reelected after January 6th. And after so many things that he said and did that were completely off limits, like that any other politician would have been ruined for, and instead he managed to get reelected for it, it meant that all of the Republicans more and more felt like, well, I guess this is what we're doing. And they either went with it or they went the other direction and got pushed out of their party.
Yeah.
And so the party purged itself over the last 6 years of anybody that wasn't loyal. But also, if you're willing to be a Trump appointee at this point, you're basically signing on to be a loyalist that disregards the law in favor of the king, because you've seen what happens if you don't. So,
Yeah.
like, what smart, competent, law-following person is going to say yes to a Trump appointment at this point if they know, well, at some point he's going to give me some crazy order, and if I say no, he's going to call me a traitor like he did his own vice president. I mean,
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
literally called his vice president a traitor and rallied people to storm the Capitol, threatening to hang him. I mean, at what point can anybody expect to now be an appointee of Trump's in any position and not think they better do exactly what he says at any moment?
Yeah, I think it's really crazy because you watch these cabinet meetings in which they all sit around the table and they stroke him as if he's
Yeah.
like, LeBron in Akron.
Or Kim Jong Il.
Yeah, that's what I
I
was
mean,
gonna
that's what I
say. Like,
see.
if you do a voiceover and do a dialect and add a North Korean accent, like you're there, right?
It's
So
nuts. But I think there's also an element of you end up with people who aren't competent or sane. Like we've got all these reality show stars, like judges that were reality TV judges getting appointed to top Department of Justice positions, or, a podcast guy getting to be head of the Department of War, which it's not even called. And he just decides to call it that. I mean, it's absurd. It's reality TV, and it's a production of actors who are not qualified, who have crazy ideas, but even their crazy ideas, they'll end up deferring to Trump if he says so.
What do you say to the argument that they make? Because if you listen to the talking heads and the token Republicans that are on a CNN panel or otherwise, right, that they're all in lockstep when it comes to Hegseth and these bombings in particular, and they lean into, well, we're killing drug dealers and drugs
Right.
kill Americans, right? It's such a simplistic argument that they're making that the base, who loves acronyms and simplicity, is basically parroting. Um,
It's the same message they've done with immigration enforcement,
right.
where they're like, oh, well, if you just follow the law, okay. If you commit a misdemeanor, that now means that you could be abducted and thrown into a prison with no trial or jury. I'm sorry, that's the equivalent. We're talking about a misdemeanor offense, but these same people are going to, speed and expect not to be treated like dirt, maybe because they're not brown skinned and with an accent.
Let me ask you one last question about the Hegseth before I move on to my first topic.
I hope you're going where I want you to go with your first topic, by
I
the way.
think I think it's a through line.
Uh-huh.
But my question to you is, given the Republicans in Congress, in the Senate in particular, that are now going on television on every one of the news channels saying,
Yeah.
if this happened,
It's a war crime.
that's fucked, right?
Yeah.
Again, the chinks or the cracks in the armor are presenting themselves. Do you feel that Hegseth makes it through this new issue, given what he's already made it through to this point with how the president views him?
Well, I think it's interesting because, I think we saw a news article come out just this morning, maybe, or at least I just saw it this morning. That was the inspector general or whoever saying that the signal chat leak that he did, months ago was actually a big misstep, which we all knew. But a report was released about the problems associated with that. I got the sense from that, if they're just releasing that report today, that perhaps the administration is going, well, we don't want to cave to the people saying this is a war crime because we want to be tough, but let's throw him under the bus for a different reason. That's, not that big a deal, that Americans won't care that much about because it's not a war crime. We're not talking about people going to prison for this. In order to throw him under the bus and get rid of him, I have to think he's gone at this point. I hope it doesn't stop there, because clearly he's not the only one involved in decisions and policies like this. You can't put it all on that. This is coming from the top.
Flipping the coin, my last question, part B. Flip a coin. Who's out first, Hegseth or RFK?
Hegseth. I don't think Trump looks ready to abandon RFK. I think he still likes the crazy there, and I think that I think they see that as feeding a certain part of their base that they want to keep, and they don't think it's hurting them enough elsewhere, which is insane, of course, by all objective measures. But here we are. They seem to want to keep him.
Let's talk. Okay, my first item is piggybacking off of Law and Order. We're talking about getting bad guys, blowing them up because we have big bombs. They have little boats. And what comes along with Law and Order is actually the exact opposite of Law and Order, is pardoning. The pardon process. In my little circles of private text messages with a whole spectrum of individuals, over the years, the argument has always kind of fundamentally come down to law and order and process, right? And here we are in this administration where we have seen an explosion of pardons, second to none. Now, all of the conservative,
Biden.
Right. Look, let's be clear, and I'll put this on record, and I've put it on record multiple times. What Biden did was wrong, and I understand why he did it, but it's wrong. I am 100% against. I don't like executive orders. I don't like presidential pardons, and I do not like, especially, presidential immunity. I don't think any of those groups of people or the individual.
I don't think our founders would have liked it either.
No,
and
exactly.
I think it has been deeply abused.
So let's talk about the big one of the day, and there's been a lot of them over the last few months. Honduran president who was captured, tried, convicted by American court system, by the federal government, judge and jury, for being responsible for transferring trackable 800 tons of cocaine into the United States. That's 1.6 million pounds
And
of
actually
drugs.
into the United States.
Brought it in, set it up, took the money, had the cartels paying him cash bribes for distribution channels, not in the Honduran forest or through the jungles of Panama, but in the
Or on little
Chicago
boats.
suburbs,
Yeah.
and in Birmingham and Biloxi. That's where this shit went.
Yeah.
And that guy, if you look at the Venn diagram of time and everything that's going on right now, you overlap what Pete and crew are doing and blowing up
Mhm.
drug boats at the exact same time. A guy that we
What
know,
a contrast.
well, he's not that bad of a guy.
Yeah.
So, a couple things. So you dig into it and you start to like figure it out. And the initial response, the talking point that the right is laying out as to why it's okay, is because he was unjustly punished by a vindictive
Uh-huh.
judicial system, right? Unfair. And then you turn to page 2 and keep reading, and you find out that yes, he was the conservative president of Honduras.
Mhm.
He is backing the conservative candidate in
Mhm.
Honduras, and there's a presidential election right around the corner. We are not stupid people.
No.
And when I listen to people defend this at this point, and the list is shortening. There are enough talking heads now that are
Agreed.
center right that are like, no, fuck this. This is wrong.
And some
But-
Republican leaders in office. Yeah.
But my question is to you, why do you think it is not resonating with just normal population that hates pronouns, that can't stand trans in sports, right? That group of people, why are they incapable of looking at a news item like this and the direct threat and impact that this criminal had on our populace? Where's the disconnect?
It doesn't impact their lives directly. And so it ends up being part of the news storm of constant headlines all day, every day, that are overwhelming. And so they just turn it off and they read it all as, oh, it must be biased from a source I don't trust. I mean, I think it's that simple. Whereas like the pronoun thing, they've made part of their daily lives. Every time they see somebody write he, him after their name, they get annoyed about it. And so it reminds them they don't like this thing, and it therefore somehow impacts their life. But this idea of a guy that was prosecuted, it's easy enough for them to write it off, as they've written off everything Trump has ever said as, oh, well, if Biden did it, it must have been corrupt. And of course, every Trump accusation is a confession. I mean, he has weaponized his Department of Justice like nobody has ever seen in history. And so he just continues to accuse Biden of doing the same thing in order to make it look like any accusation of him must just be a partisan attack. And so it's easy for them to write it off. And the same way, they see people in their community with an accent and they decide that's another that I don't want around. And so they don't mind seeing somebody with an accent getting bombed in a boat. If the president says he's bad, the president must be right. And if the president says this guy was corrupt or was corruptly prosecuted by Biden, it must be true also. And they just move on.
So in the history of organized crime, of crime in general, it generally comes down to money and power, right?
Yeah.
And the argument that is being made by some people, like when they're asked, people that are on the left or even center that are asked, why do you think he's doing it? And it comes down to it's money and power. The power is pretty obvious in so much that this is a political power play. They do want a friendly government in Honduras. They would prefer the conservative government by helping this guy out, by pardoning him. That's going to add muscle, probably threat.
It's just like the Argentinian bailouts.
100%. But then the money side of things is where it gets really, really interesting. Because if you go back to another previous pardon, that being of the Bitcoin or the ByteDance or whatever it was, the Chinese national that had the platform, that they pardoned him after they found out that particular crypto platform was funneling and laundering
investing
money
into theirs.
Yeah, of ISIS and Hezbollah and Hamas and all these organizations around the world and wallets coming from North Korea, etc.
But if
Now
they're going to
you
invest that money into Trump crypto, then guess what? You get a pardon. And my guess is you're going to have, if somebody could dig enough in the crypto trails and in the money trails, you'd be finding investments in Trump buildings around the world, or Trump investments around the world, or more likely the Trump and Kushner financial industry.
Well, yeah, and I think that, like, I like to invest. I invest myself. I have had some play in crypto for a number of years now, and there was a little bit of like realistic enthusiasm in the crypto world whenever Trump won, as it pertains to, you know, the idea that, okay, these are people that, or they're people that are going to be in this administration that do see the potential legitimacy. They do see the technical or the advantages that can occur technologically speaking.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about, like, if you break it
I
down
know. Yeah,
to
a
a
lot
white
of people
page.
thought so. Yeah.
And then here's what happened. He bastardized it.
Yes.
He used it for personal benefit. And now the legitimacy that had, a lot of it that had been accumulated through use cases, is now being questioned because of the grift.
They never cared about the potential positives of crypto other than grift. Their opportunity to use it to make more money and to do it with less of a trail. I mean, and less regulations around it.
Yeah,
I mean,
so if we were able to track it, I think it'd be really interesting if you took the last 10 major financial pardons, you know, financially
financial
centered
crimes.
pardons, right? Correct. You know, from the Honduran drug, because it's cocaine, but we're really talking about cash.
Yeah, drug
You know,
dealers are big money.
Yeah, they have money. You know, I think there's a correlation. If there was any way that you could pull the curtain back on that, I think they would all spend the next 100 years in prison.
I think that's right. But I also, I do want to say one more point about that. Like, because you ask about like how the public is okay with it. And the public isn't, if they're paying attention. The public that's not paying attention doesn't care. And then there are the loyalist crowd who just they've gotten to the point where they reject evidence as almost being the opposite of evidence. Like, if there's evidence for something in a scientific way or in a legally supported way, then it's actually more suspect rather than less, as compared to if Trump says so. And I think this goes back to like a lot of the evangelical community that like treats evidence and questions and doubt as sin, right? And so you believe this thing absolutely, and any questioning of it is you being like risking going to hell. And I think that they've conflated that, and Trump and Republicans have effectively caused a conflation of any questioning of their authority figures becomes that. And so they're looking at this trial that had evidence presented, a judge, a jury, and like proven guilt of massive drug trafficking, and saying that is automatically suspect, compared to zero evidence presented by choice. Even if they have it, the administration is refusing to present evidence even to say that these drug dealers on boats are even drug dealers and drug traffickers are even a threat at all. They're saying we don't need evidence because evidence is bad. Instead, we just say so, therefore it's true. And that message apparently is stronger with the Republican base than actual evidence. And I think the same goes for RFK and all of these others we've talked about, right? Like, that's the through line.
Yeah, because on the other side of every one of these arguments is a woke Disney remake, and it just fucking triggers them. So
and we can't be woke. I mean, that's why President Trump is sleeping through every meeting now.
Like, who cares?
Item number 3, that anti-woke.
Item number 3 is yours. You mentioned you wanted to go down to the country music capital of the world, Nashville, specifically the Tennessee district, the special election the other day. Kick it off. What you got?
Yeah, so we've got a special election this week, right? That, like all of these other special elections over the last year or 6 months, I guess, we're seeing a dramatic shift away from Republicans. This is a seat that was won by Trump 22 points. I think he had 60% to 38. And it came down to single digits. And there was a legitimate shot that the Democrat was going to win. And that's against somebody already in office with a known name too, and with a Trump endorsement, a military veteran, I think it is certainly indicative of the big swing in public opinion we're seeing. I think the question is, it's still a special election. And so we're
Yeah.
seeing this average shift of 13 points. I've seen a couple different numbers. I'm not sure which one is right, but in the teens of every special election congressionally since Trump was elected, huge dramatic shift blue. Does that translate to midterms if we have proper midterms? Or is it just because they're special elections and they're lower turnout? I think that's a question, as somebody that was super involved for 8 years in every special election in Missouri, we constantly saw this, right? Where we would have dramatic shifts and way overperformance for Democrats in Republican districts in special elections. And then when time for the real election, like the big election came,
Yeah.
we just didn't see that. If anything, it got redder because the turnout got redder.
Well, you remember back to the 24 election, the 24, 48, 72 after election day, there was charts and polls and graphs that were flooding everywhere. And, as this, look at this mandate. And some of the images that I think told a bigger story than the actual numbers, because the numbers were really close. It was not a landslide.
No.
To this day, the popular vote is still under 50%. So the majority of Americans voted for somebody other than Trump.
So the majority or didn't vote.
Yeah, you're right. But what did I think told the better story and I'm going to give the Republicans credit for these images. And that was when you would look at the chart and there would be the red arrows up and to the right, where it had all the counties, and it would show an arrow as far as like what direction did the county or the district swing. And you had certain states, a lot of states, in which virtually every county in the state moved to the right. Now, a district might have been won by Harris or the Democrat that was running in a particular race, but it showed that the margin was less, indicated by the arrow. Now, fast forward to the election the other day down in Tennessee, that special election, I believe there was 14, 16 counties, somewhere in there, low mid-teens. Every one of them up and to the left. Every one of them went blue, and not by a little bit. We're talking an average of like it was 12, 13, 14 points plus in a lot of these areas. And I think that, look, it was a loss. It was a 9-point loss. And you and I both know in politics, a 9-point loss, that's an ass kicking. Yeah. But when you zoom out and you look at, okay, what is this really telling us? You take that momentum, that swing to the left of every one of those counties, right? And if you assume that those are maybe above average, middle, higher propensity voters, because it's a special election,
right?
You got to be engaged. Let's assume that if you go broader, that maybe that, the propensity level drops a little bit, and maybe the traditional camps present themselves. Even if those numbers are cut in half, and you go from this, on average, 13-point swing left, take it down to 6, right? If you see a 6-point swing to the left across the country, you are going to see a massive Democratic win. And I think it's percolating. So the Tennessee election to me wasn't really like, oh, we have a chance. Right. We never had a chance to win that race. When you look at the city of Nashville, it's cut into thirds. It literally is a pie if you look at the map.
It's like classic gerrymandering right there. Like you cut the urban area into as many pieces as possible so that they no longer have a Democratic majority in any way.
Yeah, but I was like, I think, and this is where the Democrats have to be careful. And I got really irritated with a lot of the pundits on the left the other night, because they're like, this is huge for us. This is great for us. No, let's temper the language, because you lost. Because if I'm a Republican strategist, I'm like, listen to them. They lost by 9 points and it's great, right? That's much easier to understand for the layman voter than it is, look at these numbers and charts and graphs, right? But I do think that...
and yet they're all reacting scared. I mean, to be honest, that's why we're starting to see Republican dissent, because they are seeing this trend. And it's not just that seat. In fact, that seat didn't shift as far as some of the others have over the last several elections. And so there does seem to be an ongoing trend of this nationwide. Now, to your point, I still think we're talking lower turnout, higher intensity of voters, and you're more likely to see that shift away from who's in power
Yeah.
historically. And so I've seen some of the statisticians saying numbers that matched your random guess, I think, that it really represents more like a 6 or 7 point shift in what they would predict for an actual midterm election. Now, that said, I mean, midterms, you also have all of the news cycle leading up to it. And even literally 2 days before the midterms can dramatically change what the narrative is going into the election and who shows up and who doesn't. I mean, you think about right before the 2016 presidential election, what news came out the week before that, thank you, James Comey, who now is Trump's enemy number one. And at the time, his news sure helped him with the but her emails, right? So you never know what could dominate a news cycle by then. And so I'm careful not to read too much into these shifts for what they mean for the elections. But what they do mean, I think that we can all agree on, is the overwhelming public opinion right now that all the polls are saying, that all of everything else is saying, is reflected by these. People are not happy with what the Trump administration is doing. They're not happy with Republicans that are a rubber stamp for criminals and thieves running our government and getting rid of all of our social safety nets, gutting them. They're not happy about their health care bills exploding right now and rent going up while wages aren't rising enough. They're not happy about any of this. So I think Republicans are at least seeing that and maybe starting to respond to it. And that's the only way this changes anytime soon.
Well, and they have a 900,000-pound gorilla running square at them in the face, and that is these medical premiums are all going to just come one.
Yeah. But didn't Trump say yesterday affordability is actually just a fraud word by Democrats?
Yeah,
it's not a real thing. It's not a real thing.
I love when you know what? I encourage him to continually say, he says stupid shit all the time, but now there's people.
Well, you've always said that's the issue. That's the issue.
You know, and now those that have bought his stupid shit for years, they know the reality.
The ones that were sold on him being a populist are starting to wake up to the fact that, hey, all my costs are still going up, and all I see is rich people getting richer.
Yeah. Well, you know me, I watch Squawk Box every morning, right? I'm a nerd about that shit. And the reality is every single morning there is either a portfolio manager or a CEO or a CFO, and they're all talking about the economy. And, you know, and when they talk about services, specifically like anybody from the airline, anybody from the hotel industry, anybody from automakers, when they talk about what's going on, they talk about a bifurcated market. They talk about the elite earners, the high value buyers or first class travelers, right? That market's great. We're doing great. Look at our numbers, right? You know, and then they'll immediately be like, our economy travels down, right? It's like it's a tagline, you know. So
that's not what matters to the investor class.
Well, and the thing is, we know historically because he said it, his people say it. In the mornings, Trump sits on Truth Social and he watches Squawk Box every single morning. Mm-hmm. That is his source of what is going on. So when he hears the Wall Street heads telling him, "Oh, it's great. Look at the earnings. Look at all this," he's not dissecting.
Best economy ever.
He's not dissecting the reality in the numbers, or he's just flat out ignoring it. Like, it doesn't matter. These people are going to keep me elected. So
all of the above.
All right, let's move on here. I want to get into a little bit of I'll call this the vice section of our conversation today. And I'm going to lean into Missouri because it's happening here in Missouri. The other day, after there was a ballot initiative, correct, for sports gambling in the state of Missouri, it passed. The people wanted it. They said, yes, let us
by a slim majority, but yeah.
Yeah, let's parlay away. Anyway, that passed, and at the exact same time, Missouri is one of many states, red states in particular, that are now banning Pornhub without, basically from an identification process, et cetera. So A lot of different directions we can go here, and
Oh
you
man,
know,
I
my
got
brain
so much to talk about on these topics.
and my brain was
Dangerous.
swirling because this is one of those topics when it comes to personal choice, when it comes to quote entertainment and what you do with your time, your money, your body.
Yeah.
I tend to lean libertarian. Like, I don't care, do your thing. I do like guardrails.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that
That's
now,
where I land.
how do you define a guardrail? What does it mean? So let me lead into this with, I believe the only guardrail that matters is the age guardrail. Technology companies have the ability. They know. They know who are on the devices, who are in the apps. They know without a shadow of a doubt who is accessing the information. So there needs to be a line, a hard line at 18 and below, right? That look, access to Pornhub direct, access to gambling sites, access to even Reddit. Reddit is easily navigated to, you know, you can get porn. If you want porn, you can go on Reddit. You don't need to give them your ID, right? There's plenty of people. Instagram, same
Even
thing.
YouTube. I mean, honestly. Yeah.
All of them have it. So
Yeah.
this is not new. I think it's funny that, again, it's kind of that Christian rights, moral authority. You know, we had a mandate, we've got a wave, we've got the majority, and the current attorney general here in Missouri, Hanaway, you know, she's now the new morality police at the same time. And I find it all like porn bad, gambling good.
I've
Is
had the same thought lately.
is kind of the simplicity of the argument. Now, here's what I know from the people that I know that have had issues with both. One is kind of a mental relationship, social issue. You've got demons. You take it out on it
And there are some abuse risks in the production of it,
100%.
I think.
But gambling, I've known a number of individuals that have had issues on that side.
And that can destroy families so fast.
That's a transactional issue.
Yeah.
That is one that, you know, when you do not have guardrails, and I know that a lot of these sites are like, oh, well, we track your, you know, your amounts and all this stuff. Or if you need help, dial this hotline, right? It's all bullshit.
Yeah.
If Dave Portnoy is out there saying, hey, Missouri, hey, Missouri, hey, Missouri, it's pop culture. It's here to stay. It is what it is. But that's okay in the eyes of our legislative body. Now, again, I like the idea that it went to a ballot initiative. I like the fact that people were able to vote, and those that didn't know what it was about or didn't do their homework and were opposed to it, but it won. Guess what? You know, it's fruit from the poison tree, right?
Yeah.
It goes both ways.
Yeah.
Because pro-lifers, they're not real happy in Missouri right now either, and they continue to fight against it. So I think that
I will say I do think the ballot initiative is challenging for complex law. Like, rather than just the simple question of should sports betting be legal or not in Missouri. And this was true for marijuana too. Like, should marijuana be legal or not? Instead, it's dense law about those topics being put in where people have to make a either or choice to the whole package. And I think it's a big failure of the legislature on both fronts not to get in front of this. Like, I can't tell you the number of hearings I sat on about sports betting because we all knew it was coming. And so we had all these hearings, but they just failed to actually act in passing a responsible approach to sports betting that had guardrails. And I will say, in the conversation, I first of all, even if they'd passed it, I'm not sure they would have done a better job. Probably would have been as or more corrupt. But that's because our system is broken. We had all these hearings where we actually did special hearings just on this topic, which is really unusual, where we had 6 or 7 in Gen Laws that weren't about a bill. They were about the concept, and they brought in a different group for each, a different expert, you might say, for each hearing to just talk about it from their perspective. And after 5 of these, I'm sitting here going, why are we only hearing from people that are going to make money off this? Like, we're only hearing from all these groups fighting with each other about who's going to make more. of the money off of sports betting. We didn't hear from until I actually reached out to somebody in Massachusetts to come in and talk about what are the public health risks here. Like, and I, like you, I come at this with a pretty libertarian perspective usually of like, well, people are doing it anyway. Let's make sure it's legal and regulated, but still it's adults making adult decisions, right? But then I talked to a friend of mine that lives in London who I expected to be all in too. And he was like, dude, I can't tell you the number of people I see like living at the door of a corner store because they're broke, because every dollar they get, they go into the store and bet on a game.
Yeah.
And it absolutely destroyed. And I started looking at the stats for this and I was like, oh my God, like this is way more destructive than drugs. This is way more destructive than other types of gambling even.
Just look at Powerball. Look at lottery.
Right.
You know, there was an article that recently came out and pointed out that if you look at people that participate in Powerball or Mega Ball drawings, 75% are at or below the poverty level.
Because they're buying a bit of hope.
They're
paying for a bit of hope because they're desperate. And that's what the gambling is too. And sports betting, unlike other types of gambling, it feels more like I can get this because I know these teams. Like I can predict this right, unlike numbers, you know, where you just get lucky.
Here's the funny thing about gambling. In a previous life, in a previous world, in the previous world, you have bookies, right? Yeah. They would have a partner. They would have some account in Aruba or somewhere in which that's where the bets were made. And then just like the movies, there would be cash transactions at a set location in which whoever's taking the bets either collects or pays out, right?
Now I can sit on my couch with a phone.
What's funny about that, like if you start to think about where are the safety nets? Where is the protection for an individual or for a family or for, you know, means? Well, in the old world, the bookies were human and they knew the person, and they probably knew if they were married. They probably knew if they had kids. They probably knew if they, you know, or if they were making a lot of money or not a lot of money. There was this weird way in which there was a filter, which served as a dare I say, safety net, because
a couple barriers you got to get through.
If they crossed the line, a couple of things would happen. They would be cut off, or they might get their ass beat, or, you know, like these were the realities of the previous books. And what happened is that created a certain amount of balance in the world of those that wanted to gamble and what they could gamble. Yeah. DraftKings, none of that.
Oh, it's so easy. Well, and that's why I saw someone say the other day that like they're offering, and you see these ads, I'm sure, all day too. They're offering, you bet a $5 bet and they'll give you $300 to bet with. $300. 100%. What drug dealer will give you that much free? Like a 30 to 1 or I guess 60 to 1 ratio of money back, of drugs for your money, because they know you're going to be that hooked. I mean, that's how deadly and dangerous this stuff is, and that's how much money they're going to make off it. Like, well, that's the other thing. To me, the side of it that is, I have no problem with people making bets with each other, right? Yeah. Like betting on sports, like, of course that should be legal. But the idea that you can have these giant corporations making exorbitant amounts of money advertising to people and preying on them to bet and playing on their addictions. It's the same way I feel about all of the vice industries, that we have to have regulations on how they profit off of people for these, how they target people for these.
We were willing to kill the Marlboro Man and Joe Camel.
Right.
But we are totally okay with the rest of this. Last stat that I want to throw out in the world of vice here. You know, my guy, Prof G, Scott Galloway, he was talking the other day about young men and the rate at which they're executing the act of coitus, right? From 22 to 34, the number is currently over 37% of young men in that age demo have not committed the act in at least 3 months.
How many have
Seems like
placed bets? No.
it seems like a crazy number, but what makes it awful in the context of Vice and what are people doing?
Oh,
If you go previous to 2015 through the last 20, 30, 40 years, that number averaged 10%.
oh, interesting.
It's a threefold increase in forced abstinence, choice abstinence, whatever that is occurring. That when you think about, we
Because
always joke.
they're replacing that drive with other addictions.
Well, I think there's a whole number of things because I kind of made a post about it the other day, and
Video games.
a couple women jumped on and like, look, the reason is we're not putting out to those motherfuckers. Like he was like, we know who they
I've
are.
seen some social media posts like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I find it funny, like what our Missouri government in particular with these items, you're going to go and you're going to shut down Pornhub, and why are you doing it? Because it's morally wrong or whatever.
Mm.
Well, that's weird to me. But we're okay with gambling, and and there's not even a real sell as far as like, well, we're going to generate revenue, right?
Right. No, nothing like that.
So it's like, what are we doing? It all seems
No, the
like,
next one will be, how are we going to legalize and tax porn so that we can find another revenue stream like gambling and pot and gas tax and cigarette tax.
oh yeah, which is probably a perfect segue because your third item, jump us. Let's get a little Missouri legislator. Give us a session update summary. What do you want to hammer on?
So this week, pre-filing opened. So all the legislators who are in office, they get to start filing their bills early, December 1st. So we got to see a whole bunch of bills. I've got a lot to look through, so I'm not going to start going into those. But we're seeing things like, abortion is murder and you're going to get the death sentence. Things like that. We're getting all kinds of stuff. What's interesting is most of the leadership of the House didn't file any bills yet. And they're all saying that their top priority is the same as the governor's top priority this year. So we probably won't see it filed until his state of the state. What's that top priority? Getting rid of the income tax. Yeah. So I could talk for days about this, and I know it's so wonky, but like people need to understand how fundamentally like this is an existential threat to Missouri. Because Missouri is not like the states that don't have income taxes that have huge tourism or huge oil revenue. You're talking like Florida or Texas or Alaska, where like they don't need income tax because they have a very unusual other source of revenue. Missouri, on the other hand, is more like Kansas. And we all know about like Brownback did these huge tax cuts to their income tax. Their budget collapsed because it wasn't a great economic year anyway. And they threw him out of office, elected a Democrat governor, and a whole bunch of Republicans switched parties because they were like, no, we need fiscal responsibility. And so they actually raised their tax back up. Well, Missouri for the last 20 years, 30 years, has been doing the same thing. We've actually cut our taxes more than Kansas did. But we've been held afloat by a couple other things like federal dollars coming in. And that's coming to a head. Our budget's getting tighter and tighter. Our economy has not grown like any of the states around us, despite these tax cuts being designed to grow the economy and promising all this growth. We've had the opposite in Missouri. But here they are now saying, well, let's just double down. And instead of just doing these incremental tax cuts that we've been doing for the last 30 years that have already been horrible, we're just going to get rid of the income tax entirely. Well, guess what that's going to mean? That's going to mean we get rid of public schools, or we get rid of Medicaid, or both. We're already having to we already have the lowest state funding for schools of any state in the country. And we already have the all these other lowest paid state workers of any state in the country. MODOT, people complain this week, but they've refused to give them pay raises for the last 10 years. Every time I sat in the chair saying, hey, they've told us they can't do the snow removal efficiently because they don't pay people enough, so they leave to go work for UPS instead.
Right.
I mean, the list goes on and on. Well, what happens when we get rid of our income tax? How are they going to replace it? We already have pretty high sales tax. Are they going to increase that to 15%? So now every time you buy something at the store, you go buy new clothes, you have to spend 15%. in taxes, that's just a tax on low income people.
Yeah.
Or they got rid of the capital gains tax last year. That's $500 million right there a year. $500 million gone from our budget because they said we don't want to tax what, crypto sales or rich people's investments. I mean, it's crazy pants what we're talking about. Now, some of them are going to come out and go, well, that's why we legalize sports betting and we legalize pot. We're going to have all this magic money coming in. And it's like, no, because
That's not how it works.
well, and you guys designed these things so that all the money is profit for these big companies that are coming in, like raking people, like just completely destroying lives and preying on people and collecting profit. And we get a tiny bit of that on top. We've got the lowest cigarette tax, the lowest gas tax in the country. And yet they're saying we're going to fund our government on vices. Well, what's that also going to mean? If that happens, and we're saying our public schools are dependent, as they already are in the lottery, well, we spend money as a state every year. We spent like $16 million my first year in office. I found out when I got into office and looked at the budget, $16 million advertising the lottery to people to convince people to play the lottery. And they justified that by saying, well, it's a return on investment because that money goes into education. And this is how we fund education. So what? Now we need people to smoke more pot. We need people to gamble more. We need people to do all these things in order to pay for schools and healthcare and roads and bridges. It's insanity. And that's coming from these people that are then claiming we're the moral police and we can't have porn be legal in Missouri or accessible in Missouri because we're so moral. But when it comes to money off of ruining people's lives, oh no, we're all for that. In fact, let's have more of it because that's how we're going to pay our bills.
You know, I think about like the benevolently stupid Nick Schroers of the world, and you know, funneling down underneath the governor's mandate or edict on this thing, and it's as if they think everybody is stupid, and they're relying upon their base not understanding how this works.
Yeah,
because this is not even a policy / moral debate. This is a math equation.
right.
This is not, you know, multiple choice. We have a budget, and you know, and this idea that they sell, they're like, well, we're going to cut spending too. Fine, you've been saying that for 20 years. You're the party in power. Where have you cut spending? Right? You don't, because that's just kind of how this goes. You underfund, you shift dollars, but that's not cutting spending to the point in which you're creating a healthy fiscal environment.
Right.
That's word soup.
It's not fiscal responsibility, that's for sure.
No, exactly. So then, you know, again, and you pointed out at the intro here on this subject, when you look at the states that have it and that everybody's like, oh, look, they did it. They're doing it well. Again, Texas generates so much revenue off of its energy / oil gas production that offsets the vast majority.
And that is not going to happen here.
That doesn't happen here. We don't have oil. You know, you look at Florida. Florida has Mickey Mouse and the ocean on 3 sides, right?
Yeah.
We
ocean everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. We don't have that, right? We have the Ozarks, which is kind of at capacity. It is not. And oh, by the way, the television show that everybody loved, that was filmed in Georgia. That wasn't even filmed here. So when their argument that like, well,
partly because we didn't have the tax credits here. Because we don't have money.
It's this stupid field of dreams theory where they're like, if you cut it, they will come. Who's going to come here? What industries? Because if you look at your narrative, if you look at the core of individuals that are pushing this thing, you guys are MAGA. Current polling across the country shows, especially in areas in which you have large brain trusts that are developing new businesses, industry, etc., they are not MAGA. These are college educated. These are growing industries. These are people that are diverse, that have a lot of different opinions and different lifestyles. So if you have a state in which your sales pitch is, come here, you're not going to pay income taxes, but don't look at our social policies because we don't fucking like you. How is that going to
sorry,
go over?
We're not going to have good roads or schools or parks for you to rely on because we don't have the funding for that. So your family or your workers aren't going to want to raise their kids there either.
Yeah, it's one of those things like it all sounds good in the ether, Right.
But the
Oh, you want
reality is they all know. They all know it's bullshit. They
to?
all know that it's just a payout to their rich donors. But they also know that it's a good soundbite for voters because you said they're counting on people being stupid. I think it's fair to say they're counting on people being short-sighted and self-interested. And like
When I say s-
when you tell me like, oh, you're not going to have to pay taxes anymore. Like Trump's now saying he's going to get rid of the income tax on the federal level. If you tell me that, I'm thinking it's so easy to be like, oh man, that would be so much simpler for me. And how much more money would I have in my pocket at the end of the year? It takes a longer thought process to then think, okay, but what's that going to mean to the world around me and all of the things I rely on, even to make money? Like, what does that mean for the roads and bridges? What does that mean for public infrastructure? What does that mean for police? I mean, when they talk about the St. Charles legislators like Nick Schroer, they want to ban or they want to get rid of property tax too. They don't want personal property tax. Well, okay, what's that mean for firefighters and for police and for your school districts? Like that is slightly less of just a what does that mean for me? Because
right.
it takes that extra step. The me right now, when I'm struggling just to put food on the table or whatever for my family, it's much easier to look at the tax bill and be like, okay, well, that's a bigger help. So thanks, Nick. And they're
Yeah.
counting on people just focusing on that because people don't have the time to process the bigger picture half the time. They're too busy
Yeah.
just trying to get by.
Yeah, my stupid references in regards to their mathematical
Yeah,
ineptitude.
yeah, yeah.
Because
No,
again,
no, I hear you. Yeah,
here's the thing, like for anybody listening, like, okay, well, I still would like all my taxes back. No, look, the increase in sales tax, it's really, really simple. Here's how you need to look at this, people. If you go once a week to the grocery store, like we do, and God, I wish it was only $100, but if you spend $100 on the ticket item, and this sales tax jumps to 15%, because currently we're in that roughly 5-6%. Shit, I don't even know. It
no,
varies from.
we're about 10 in most of the metro area.
Okay. Okay, so
It's
if that jumps up,
six is the state number, but then there's the local number that gets added on.
yeah. Okay, so you go from that to 15. We're talking $15 4 times a month. That's $60. That's my hit. As a percentage of my gross, it is X. Now go upstream. If somebody's in the $1 million threshold and above, or they're 500 grand, whatever they're making above, the rich, right? As a percentage of their income, they're the ones that are winning. All of you stupid fucks that were afraid of pronouns, that are like, oh my God, give me my money back. No, no, no. You will lose, because that's how this math works. We do not have the capacity, we don't have the story to tell, or the natural resources, industry or otherwise, to attract the kind of headcount it would take to
Yeah.
offset that cut.
Dude, it's also just like everything else, it's a shift of money from the working class to the rich. That's
Yeah.
all they do in all of these things, right? Like we had decades of a progressive income tax structure that made it so that we were actually prioritizing people at the bottom and actually shifting money from the very top, from the people that were like making exorbitant amounts of wealth off of our systems and saying, okay, you got to send some of that back into the system and back to the people that are working to create that system.
Yeah.
Now they're trying to shift it all the other direction. It's like reverse socialism of just moving money to the rich, moving money to the rich. The gap's getting wider. And if you take away income tax, a third of the population in Missouri doesn't pay income tax because they don't make enough money to pay it. And
Yeah.
so they're not paying it. If getting rid of the income tax doesn't help them even a little bit, and that's
No,
the
that's
people
a
struggling the most. And
yeah,
yet,
that's a
if you increase sales tax, every dollar that they do have, they end up spending because they're living paycheck to paycheck. Literally every dollar they make, they're spending. So then they're spending 15% on every dollar instead of their income tax where they're right now not paying it. So it's reversing the trend and making it so that poor people pay like 50% of their income in taxes and rich people pay like 0.3.
so let me I'm going to shift to my last item, and it's kind of piggybacking off of what exactly what we're talking about. because one of the things that we've name dropped him a couple times, Mr. Nick Schroer, is coming down the pipe with. He wants to pass legislation to overhaul MODOT and all this shit because of the disaster that they had in managing the storm on Monday and other things. And he wants to make it a bureaucracy issue. But I wanted to throw this out to you because I found it really funny. Because if you looked at Monday and the storm that came in, and it was a good one. It came in early. Look, that's what happened. A lot of snow, iced fast. It was a good one. If you looked at the St. Charles did not handle it well as a county. The main roads, and a big part of that is this big push for 70. 70 is an absolute disaster of construction. So that pipeline coming into the area is already bad on a 70 and sunny day.
Yeah.
Okay, so you add this, that was bad. All of the side roads, the rural side roads, because they're rural, right? It took them a long time to address them. They weren't prepared. And to your point, you don't have enough drivers making enough money, or they're not offering enough money to get more drivers. They're all delivering for Amazon, period. So you had that issue. Okay, so St. Charles was a disaster. St. Louis County was not much better. Certain municipalities kind of jumped the gun a little bit. Maybe their guys had some free time, so pre-salting. I give it a solid C+. If we assume St. Charles was an F. Para and the city of St. Louis, solid B+. The highways, the main arteries, the Kings highways, the Jeffersons, everything, all passable. Because that day I had to move from west into the studio over in Midtown, and you could see it in real time. Now, mind you, more snow had been falling from the beginning of my drive to the end of it. And by the time I got to the city, it was good. Was it great? No. Was it good? Yes. Was it passable? Yes. And I wanted to throw this out to you because as the snow is falling, if you looked at socials and you were like the usual suspects that were from Camp TJ to Chara, they were praying for disaster. They wanted the roads to be bad. They wanted to prove that Kara had failed, that it was everywhere, and it just wasn't that way.
Well, I man, I got lots to say about this. I will say, of course, Kara's team prioritized this response because they had to. They knew that this was a really big deal. That is one of the reasons she was elected. That they sure as hell better not blow the first one of these. People are already mad about the tornado for things that were or were not her administration's fault. But she promised these basic services would be their priority, and they had to do that. But I want to zoom out a little bit and say, when we're comparing this to St. Charles or other areas of Missouri, and they're blaming MODOT, keep in mind, MODOT is responsible for giant roads in rural Missouri, or in St. Charles for that matter, that serve fewer people than one residential block in Tower Grove. Right? And yet MODOT, the state, pays to maintain those. But the city has to pay to maintain all of our own roads because they're not state highways.
Right.
Our state has more miles of state highway per capita than any state in the country. Okay. Meaning the state takes the responsibility for them. That's not in St. Louis. That's not in the urban areas. That's all in rural places or places like St. Charles where the state's taking the responsibility. Guess what? That means St. Louis City taxpayers are paying for those roads and bridges to be cleared in St. Charles, and have to pay for all of our own by ourselves with no help from St. Charles taxpayers for St. Louis cities. So first of all, it's completely unfair. And yet the Nick Schroers will be the first in the world to be like, Tashara and the Democrats, or if it had been Kara that screwed it up this time, the Democrats can't handle roads in there. But look how well we do it in St. Charles. Well, guess what? If we do it well, they're still going to blame government for their problem, even though they're leeching off of us to clear their roads. But then the other half of this is that literally every year that I was in office, in budget committee, MODOT came to us and talked about these pay raises. And they said, look, we're paying $10 an hour less than UPS. We just need you to authorize these pay raises for us. And they said, look, we've got all these analyses to show you that it won't even cost us more money as a state. Like, because we're so underpaid right now, it's actually costing us more because we're having to pay for people filling for vacancies. We're having to pay people. We're training drivers. And then a week after we finish training them and they get their CDL, they literally walk across the street where there's a big billboard that says, at UPS, we pay $10 an hour more. And they go take their CDL. So the state just paid to train them to go work for other people. And they're short drivers. And they're like, so we'll actually save money if we pay our workers more. And guess how Nick Schroer voted every single time that I tried to say, let's support MODOT and pay for this. He voted no, even though it didn't even cost the state money. Every Republican, well, maybe not, there might have been a handful that voted with me, but almost every single Republican voted against paying MODOT workers. But they're perfectly happy then when MODOT doesn't do a perfect job because, you know, the snow wasn't predicted to be quite what it was that day. MODOT didn't do a great job. So now they're like, oh, look how terrible MODOT is. We need to cut funding to MODOT because we have to punish them and show them and we have to audit them and do all this stuff. It's just this classic Republican bullshit narrative of government is broken. Look at all these terrible services. We need to cut funding to them. Then they watch the services get worse. They refuse to fund them. They refuse to improve the services. The services do, in fact, get worse. And then they say, see, government's broken. We should just get rid of this service entirely and privatize it so that their buddies can then make money off of it instead.
To the highest bidder.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the name of their game because it's their politics. Their politics is government sucks. So they have to then make it come true and make government suck more. And then they find ways to make money off of the fact that they claimed government sucked and make money for their friends. I mean, that's all they do at this point. They don't have solutions. They only have, let's tear it apart and make money off it.
Well, that's an hour. A little over an hour. Well done. Well, excuse me. Well, it's been a while. So with the session, you're going to have a lot of homework here over the next few days, weeks of catching up on what's coming down the pipe in Mo leg. And obviously this administration is the gift that will continually give. Yeah.
And we've got these ballot initiatives to watch too. Signatures gathering. There was a court case yesterday we should have talked about, but we can at some point.
Yeah, we'll bring it up. Well, I want to wait until the numbers come in on the other initiative to see where we're at as far as what's going to make a ballot or not. But without further ado, thank you for listening, everybody. Subscribe, like, review, shoot us questions, topics, etc. Hell, you want to come on? I like meeting new people. And if you're a little bit of spitfire, even better. You don't even have to tell us which way you lean. We'll figure it out pretty quickly. So tell me you're joking. We're out of here. More news next time. Until then, Peter, adios, man.
See you soon, man.